Today, I'm going to be sharing with you in terms of what is binge eating disorder, what is emotional eating, what is stress eating, what is night eating syndrome, and as well in terms of where do you fit under those categories. However, no matter which one that you're going through, I'm going to be sharing with you as well in this episode what are the three pillars that actually we need to work on, that we need to heal and work through to help you create a healthy relationship with food and with your body so you can stop binging and start living. So make sure that you stay tuned till the end. What is binge eating? So I want to demystify something. There's something called binge eating, and there's also something called binge eating disorder. So binge eating is actually eating a large quantity of food in a short amount of time. So it could be, for example, you might be going back home from work or from school, and you go to a drive-through, and maybe you get 2 meals instead of one, or 3 meals instead of one. Or it could be as well, after dinner, you kind of order in certain types of food that you don't allow yourself to eat in public, and you might end up eating, for example, like a sub with a small pizza and even grabbing in maybe a pint of ice cream. So binge eating disorder is any moment where you're eating a larger amount of food than, for example, what would be normal physically needed for the body. However, some people, for them, binge eating could be that they ate, just a pint of ice cream, or maybe they just ate something when they weren't hungry. So there's also some nuances with, emotional eating, stress eating, overeating. But we're looking really in terms of binge eating when it's like really a large quantity of food. However, it does not take away the distress that you might be having if you're not going to those large amounts and you're having an amount that for you is very uncomfortable. And we understand that pain is totally understandable if you are uncomfortable with it. But I really want to get some terms in so that to better understand where we are situated. And as well, when you reach out for me, if you have any questions, this episode is going to help us kind of understand where you are and what kind of support you might need in extra episodes. So I make sure that I provide the right information. But there's one I want to talk about, which is called binge eating disorder. Now, in the medical world, there's a book called the DSM. And the DSM actually looks at all the mental health struggles that somebody might be going through. So it kind of puts a label or a name to what you're going through: anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, and disordered eating, OCD, bipolar. So I'm thinking about like all these mental health issues coming, because when we're going through a binge eating problem, even emotional eating, stress eating, there is a mental health aspect. It's not only about the food, but it's as well about your mindset and how you're feeling in your body, and as well the thoughts that you are having. That's why it was kind of a big breakthrough when they actually put in binge eating in the DSM a few years ago, because 20 years ago when I was struggling with it, it did not exist. It was anorexia, bulimia, eating disorder not otherwise specified, and whatever I was going through, which is the overeating and the struggle and the weight gain, was just, eat less and move more. Let's be honest. If it was that easy, I would not have this struggle. It's not that easy when there's a mental health struggle around food and it's all around our body. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. And that's when when they put in the binge eating disorder in the DSM, it was kind of a breakthrough. It's like, okay, finally, this is acknowledged as a real struggle, not just a lack of motivation or a lack of control. It's really a mental health struggle going through binge eating, even emotional eating, stress eating. So when you look in terms of the DSM for the binge eating disorder, there's certain things that to be diagnosed in it. But again, you don't have to have all this to actually be struggling with it. So I'm just giving you this information because it might be the first time you're hearing about it. And it could be also interesting if ever you go see your doctor or your psychologist to talk about this, if this is a topic that's of interest for you. So with binge eating, number one, binge eating disorder. Number one, it needs to be a recurrent episode of binge eating. It's not you have it once every few months. You need to have it at least, 1 day a week for 3 months. So if once a week for 3 months, you go through this big amount of food, then we can say that you have one of the things that goes under the DSM for binge eating disorder. However, your binge eating episodes are associated with 3 or more of the following. So I'm really making sure I'm following through for you. You're eating much more rapidly than normal. You're kind of eating and you kind of like lose track of time. You're eating until you feel uncomfortably full, like you're going to explode, like you have difficulty breathing. You're eating large amounts of food when not feeling physically hungry. So again, you're eating and eating, you're not hungry, but you feel this need to eat more. You're eating alone because you're being embarrassed of how much you are actually eating. And this is a big thing. People don't binge eat in public. Very often people binge eat alone. And you end up feeling disgusted with yourself. You feel depressed, you feel guilty for what you're doing. So there isn't any joy from binge eating. There's like this intense need in the beginning, but there's no joy when it's done. There's also a marked distress that binge eating is present. You're thinking about it every day. You're like, you know what? Today's the day. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to eat well. And then the binge eating comes in. So it's actually in your thinking process 24 hours a day sometimes. And as well, it is not followed by any, that word always, inappropriate compensatory behaviors that we can see in other type of eating disorders. So whatever you're eating, you're keeping in, but there's all this guilt that you're keeping in as well. And there's different grading. There's like mild, moderate, severe, and extreme. But let's be honest. When you're struggling with food and your body, it can be something that is big. It can be something that is small in the eyes of somebody else. But what's important is that how is it for you? And if you're seeing it as a struggle, then it is important that we talk about it. That's why I wanted to kind of create this kind of introduction of what is binge eating, because yes, medically it's very important to understand the concepts behind it, but let it be going through binge eating like we talked about. Eating a large amount of food, eating it very fast. Sometimes you feel like you're in a trance mode when you're eating it, you're really disconnected and you're eating it alone, and you're not going for celery and carrots, you're going for these forbidden foods that you don't eat in public because you're ashamed of it. But let's look at emotional eating. Emotional eating, as the title says, it's emotions leading you to overeat. So the emotional eating can be a type of binge eating as well. Maybe not as severe, maybe not as recurrent, but every time that you're emotional, you need to eat something. Maybe not in the large quantities, but you're like, I'm not feeling good. I'm gonna eat maybe 2 chocolate bars, or I'm not feeling good. I'm gonna go and grab like a second bowl of ice cream. It's like there's something in the emotional that you need to kind of eat that food to numb. And I'm gonna talk about that at the end of the episode to understand what are the triggers of these overeating periods when we're not hungry. And there's also night eating syndrome. Night eating syndrome is actually when somebody is only overeating or binge eating at night. They actually might be getting out of bed, grabbing some food. They might not even realize what they're eating, and then they go back to bed. And they only see in the garbage or what's in the counter the next day of what they ate. And that is as well very often very similar to all the other ones, but there's a bit of an unconscious, like automatic, just waking up from bed, grabbing some food, and then going back to bed. And there is the overeating. Overeating, I can say it happens. Sometimes when you like to have a dessert, you have a second portion. We're good. If something is so good that your mom cooked, you're like, I'll eat a little bit more. So when you have those like soul food, comfort foods, and you end up eating a little bit more of it, it's okay. It's more when you see that you're always overeating and there's a bit of distress around that, you're not hungry and you're not feeling physically good after it. This is when we're like, okay, let's see what's happening, because overeating can be kind of that doorway opening up to emotional eating, to binge eating, because that's how sometimes it starts. Some overeating, then it goes into emotional eating. Then if it's not healed, then we go into binge eating. So again, it's just kind of like a basic introduction, just to give you a bit of an idea that a distress, being uncomfortable in any of them is totally understandable. There's not one that's worse off and one is better off. If it's a struggle for you, it's a struggle for you. But what's interesting in terms of all that is there's a similar foundational work that no matter who comes to work with me in terms of my private practice and the work that I do, we always have to look at the 3 facets of the binge eating, the emotional eating, and any type of overeating happening. So before I continue, get a little sip of water. And let's now go for the part 2 of today's episode, which is what's causing it? What are the triggers? There's actually 3 ways that you are triggering your body or your mind in terms of overeating, binge eating, stress eating when you're not hungry. There's physical, emotional, environmental. But let me flip it a little bit for you in a different way. The number 1 thing is you are hungry. You are physically hungry and you are emotionally hungry. This is where the biology comes in. One of the first things that we need to kind of make sure is that you're binge eating emotional eating very often is because you are hungry. There's dieting during the day, there's a restriction during the day, there's sometimes for what I call first world malnourishment, which you're eating, but there's missing a lot of like nutrients and vitamins and minerals. So your body's always feeling kind of deprived of something, and it needs to eat to compensate at the end of the day. Because why does it happen at the end of the day? Because in the morning, we have this big motivation to control our food. It's like a battery. We're like, good. But as we're progressing through the day, our battery is getting used up by other things, but it's used up a lot by our like strength of not eating those foods, or I'm hungry, but I'm not going to eat it. I need to lose the weight. You know, the pattern that may be coming in. Then at night, there's no more battery. That's what your willpower is. It's very strong in the morning and it ends at the end of the day because it's like a battery. We can't use it up so much during the day and expect it to be there at the end of the day. This is why very often there's a lot of binge eating at night, because that willpower is gone. And when that willpower is gone, that battery that's drained, your body's like, well, this is an opportunity to catch up with what I missed today. And then the body's going to start that little hunger signal. But then we get into the pattern of, I failed. What did I do? What am I doing? Might as well. Let's keep eating. And again, I'm going to be talking about this more, dive deep into this in the next episodes, but I want to give you a bit of an idea of maybe where you're situated to really keep an eye open for the next episodes coming about that. But it's also you are hungry emotionally. You feel alone, you feel bored, you feel sad, you're missing that connection, you're missing that feeling good in your body. And food makes us feel good. We call it soul food. Carbs, when you eat it, you feel good after eating it. It actually releases happy hormones. So there's a hungry factor physically and emotionally that you're going through. So in the hungry factor, you see there's a bit of biology and there's a bit of psychology. You're feeling alone, you're feeling bored, you're feeling lonely. The second one that I want you to look at is that you are hurt. We very often use food as a coping mechanism because of a stressor that we went through or trauma that we went through. I still remember when I was young and I had any kind of like bad day or pain or hurt, what was the first thing my parents would give me? Ice cream and candy and feed me. It's like we feed people to calm them down. But when we're going through this process, when we're younger, it feels like we're being fed to kind of shut up. We're being fed not to say anything. We're being fed just to be grateful and just to let it be. So there's a bit of a stuffing feeling that's happening when we're eating. And that also goes in terms of the psychology of you stuffing down the emotions that you're going through, because maybe when you were younger, you tried to express them. You didn't have the love and compassion around you, and you were stuffed with food as out of love. So you kind of keep that habit of stuffing the food down. This is where you are hurt. And as well, if you live any type of trauma when you were younger, even as an adult, we all have our coping mechanisms. And food very often is that easy, accessible, non-judgmental, tasty coping mechanism that is always accessible, that we can have 24 hours a day. This is why when you are hurt and there's like severe trauma, I tell everybody you have to have the right support. You cannot go through this recovery on your own. You need to have somebody to create a nice, safe space for you to support you in the process of not forgetting the trauma that you went through, but able to heal and move with it and move through it and kind of find like a new balance in your life, depending what you lived on. And the third one, which is big, which is why we cannot just stop binge eating overnight. You know, you can eat well and see the therapy and change everything, but if you don't look at that third thing, which is the environment, which is you have created a habit. You might be like, no, I didn't create a habit. We all have habits. We all have habits. The thing what happens is that, let's say, for example, you were at a very hard job. I'll give an example, like something that I've gone through. And every day to decompress from my job, I need to have a drink. I need to have a drink. So every day during a stressful period, I was always drinking wine. Wine was my thing. But then what happens is that when a day I'm not stressed, I keep going for the wine. I created a habit that every time after work, I would grab a glass of wine. Same thing happens with food. It can be a habit of, I put the kids to bed. Oh, it's time for me to eat. it's time for me to eat, it's time for me to eat. And then we lose track with what we're eating because we're hungry emotionally and physically, and because we have forbidden all these foods that we're not allowed to eat. Who says we can't eat any food that we want? So there's compensation happening at night through binge eating. But as well, I want you to think in terms of, I'm going to dive deep into this in the next episodes, but I want to give you a bit of a, I want to put a little seed in to better understand where we're going here. Habits are created to simplify your life. So I'm sure you always wake up same side of the bed, you brush your teeth the same way, you go to the washroom, have your coffee, everything's the same. If you drive to work, you don't have to think about it, right? First time you went to work, you had to be conscious of where you're going, the street names. But now you can just drive. You don't even remember how you got there. You just know that you got there. It became a habit because instead of your conscious mind telling you where to go, because you've done it so many times, you created a neural superhighway, knowing exactly how to get to work. It's in your subconscious right now. It's running on the background. It's like the background of your computer. It's always running without you even realizing it. Binge eating, emotional eating, sometimes very similar. We don't need to go through a big stressor for us to say, well, this has been a bad day and I'm conscious about it and I'm going to go eat myself my 2 pints of ice cream. What happens? Your body memorized that there's this little emotion. It goes straight into your subconscious. Say emotion equals sugar. No doubt about it. So you might be talking to somebody. You might be watching a TV show. You might be remembering something. You might be planning an event that's happening later on. Then you have this little trigger of emotion. And we talk you are hurt. You are hungry emotionally. So a little trigger and your body knows. They're like, I know how to deal with this. You don't have to think about it. You feel this emotion. Eating is the way to go. So every time that you felt sad and you ate food, your body's like, well, okay, this is what he or she wants us to do every time. If they might feel sad food. And then you're not even realizing you're sad. Your body feels the sadness because it releases hormones and you go for food. That's why I have a lot of clients that say it just happens. I don't have to think about it. I know. Because there's a habit, a coping mechanism that you had an emotion and it went straight to food. Or a habit like me, when I came back from work, a glass of wine. Or parents would put their kids to bed and then they started eating. So there's a neural pathway, like a superhighway that you might have created, and it happens. And there's also a pattern, a habit of I watch TV and I eat. Or after I talk to my mom on the phone, I go grab something to eat. Or at the end of the workday, I end up grabbing something to eat. There's also the pattern habit that we have created. And this is when we look in terms of recovery to help us stop binging and start living. To create a healthy relationship with food in our bodies, we need to really tackle all three. You might have done certain programs, certain courses that they tackled a little bit of each, but you really want to make sure if you really want to recover from this for the long term, and to always be ahead of the curve in a certain way of making sure that your body is not hungry anymore. So there isn't even that temptation to eat. To make sure that you fill up your cup emotionally so that you're not hungry emotionally. To help you as well understand what are the traumas that you've gone through and go with the right therapist to go through that process. But as well to understand that very often binge eating is just an automatic behavior. Binge eating very often is a habit. And by creating a shift and changing and rewiring and changing the patterns, this is how we break free from binge eating. This is how we can stop binge eating and start living. So it is an amazing journey to go through this, because what happens when we're binge eating, and what happened to me, it feels like everything was on hold. It's like when I'm going to stop binge eating, I'm going to start living. When I'm going to stop binge eating, I'm going to do this. But actually it was different. It was like when I lose the weight, I'm going to, do this, that, and the other, right? We focus so much on the weight. But the more we focus on the weight, the more I struggled with binge eating. And the same thing happens with my clients. And to create this food freedom and this living our life today and not wait until, when we're able to actually release ourselves from the habit of binge eating or that coping mechanism that we created, there's a whole world that opens up to us. We are not waiting until, we are living today. And this is going to be one big thing that I want you, after this episode, re-listen to it. And I really want you to understand and to listen to see, where do you feel you need more information? I talked about the biology, physiology. I talked about the psychology, environment, but I made it simpler. Are you hungry physically or emotionally? Did you go through a past trauma? Is it stress that's always leading your binge eating? Or have you noticed patterns happening? Again, I'm going to dive deeper into this in future episodes, but I want you really to take this as like a learning opportunity. Take the time, write it out. Again, the more we are aware of why we are doing what we're doing, the easier it's going to be to understand where is the work that needs to be needed. We can't jump blindly into something hoping it works for us because it works for somebody else. We need to find what actually is going to work for us by understanding what we are going through and really getting a more personalized approach. That's why in all these episodes, let it be on the podcast or on the YouTube channel, if you're listening, if you're watching me right now, we're really going to be diving into each single one of them. However, do know that this process, it's a journey. It's going to be an interesting, a mind-blowing, and opening, life-changing journey, because it's going to be a part where we're going to discover a lot in terms of what brought you to where you are right now, and what is the work that we need to do to bring you where you want to be, which is for me really to stop binging and start living your life in the here and now. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And remember, if ever you know or think that somebody would benefit from this, share this with them. My aim is to really make sure that everybody has real, precise information to help them stop binging and start living, because there's so much bad information out there, because there isn't a one size fits all. It is really better understanding what are your triggers to help you create that shift to have a life free from binge eating. So on that note, my name is Dina Merhbi, and I am so happy to have you here. I wish you a beautiful and balanced day, and I'll catch you in the next episode.